areas on the outer ends of the island, and that's the attendance zones for Ruby Bridges and for Edison Otis, that are expected to increase in enrollment over the next 5 years, while their facilities currently are either close to or at capacity, i.e. there's not much more room to house additional students. The remaining school areas are expected to decline over the next 5 years, and those facilities are currently under capacity, which means there is room to house students in those schools. So the charge of the task force was to put together some options on how we can resolve our mismatch in enrollment and capacity. This evening, I'm going to focus on one of the categories of solutions, and that's increasing capacity at school sites. In particular, I'm going to look at the option of adding classrooms to school sites. At the special board meeting on December 12th, we explored other options in greater detail than this one, and I want to focus on this one for tonight. Again, as the task force is moving along, we focus on options and we continuously ask ourselves, what is the facility impact of this option? What is the financial impact of this option? And what's the program impact to this option? So, increasing capacity. We have generally 3 types of construction that are available to us to add new classrooms to school sites. That's the portable modular, permanent modular, and the traditional construction, that is going in and building. These items these options we've explored along several lines. One, obviously, there's some pretty big differences in cost between those 3. There's a difference in the timeliness of implementing an option. That is, to get from that decision point of, yes, we're going to put in X number of this type of portable, to the moment you can have a student actually use that additional classroom. There's a difference in flexibility between how you can reuse a site once it's placed. And the third is the life cycle of a particular type of construction. The one consistency that I heard as I went out and spoke to principals about the options at the December 12th meeting, I explained that I'd had our director of maintenance operation facilities go out to the school sites and take a look and make a determination about the maximum number of portables that could be placed on a school site. I then took those numbers and I went and spoke with all the site administrators to hear their version of what's the most that they could tolerate. Just because we can put in X number of portables doesn't mean a site can actually tolerate that level of increase. And so I wanted to get a sense of what that difference is. And the one piece that I was reminded at every single school site, and so I had to put it up there, is they asked the task force to just remember that when you add portables, it means you're putting in additional students and you're giving them less space. So that's a double whammy is what it ends up feeling at a school site. And so all of them pointed it out, and so I felt I had to include it in my presentation for this evening. Here's the comparison. So along those comparison points that I mentioned, we have the portable modular, the permanent modular, and the traditional new classroom. That's actual construction. The portable modular tends to be just relatively speaking, least expensive. The traditional is the most expensive, and the permanent modular falls pretty close to much closer to the traditional side than the portable side. On the timeliness side, we have the portable modulars that are easier to put in place, and of course the permanent modulars, which still, 6 months isn't that bad in comparison, but the traditional, as we all know, takes a lot of time, a lot of architectural work, a lot of processing through the state, and requires a year to a year and a half to actually open something up. On the flexibility side, the flexibility piece is about when you place a portable, you can actually move it. So if you have a change in demographics and you have growth in one side, which then moves into a decline on that side and growth in another school site, you can pick up a portable and actually move it. It truly is portable. That's not true for either of the permanent options, the permanent modulars and the traditional construction. Once it's there, it's not moving anywhere. The life cycle does vary pretty significantly. The portable modular is expected to is built to last about 20 years with an appropriate level of maintenance. Most school districts do use them for much, well beyond the 20 years, and they can last up to 30 years in pretty good shape. The permanent modulars in traditional construction is built to last between 50 and 100 years. That's a pretty big range, and that range is highly dependent on the sort of maintenance work that is placed on a school site. Any questions on this? Yep.
In our school district where we have, we know the traditional, but the portable as opposed to the permanent models?
Just easy ones for folks to compare. If you think of the former Island High School site, those are all portable modulars. And on the permanent side, Franklin, the double deckers we have are permanent modulars. So actually, Leland might be able to add a bit more to this, but there is definitely a difference in quality of a classroom depending on whether it's a portable modular or a permanent modular.
That's correct, and some choice too on how you want it to be configured in some of the permanent modulars. You can have a selection of how they're configured. Heating, air conditioning, ventilation systems, and so forth can be chosen before they arrive on site. A permanent modular is set on a foundation, and a portable is set into the ground and held seismically, but it's not on a foundation, so they don't last as long. They're not constructed to last as long. So.
Thanks, Leland. All right, so I want to let you guys know that the task force meets on a weekly basis, and we've actually covered a lot of ground. And the report on the options to balance elementary enrollment with capacity is currently being updated and is actually close to. While I only focused tonight's presentation on the building up option, there are other pieces, the other options explored that are close to being wrapped up. The task force, at this point, we've made a determination and are close to being able to present a recommendation to the superintendent on the miscellaneous rooms by school site and which of those we believe can be converted into regular classrooms. We've also taken a good look at what the impact of eliminating choice on the attendance boundary lines for elementary schools would look like. And then taking a look at what does this do to the over and under enrollment figures. So we still land with some schools that are over enrolled. We land with some schools that are under enrolled. And what most of our discussion is right now as we're wrapping up is sort of we have two ways we can go. Our charge was to find options that would deal with the mismatch between enrollment and capacity. One avenue addresses only the over-enrollment side, and that's when we're exploring options to build up school sites. That means adding on new classrooms to those school sites that are expected to be over-enrolled. That costs money, as a couple slides ago we saw, and does not address the under-enrollment issue. So it addresses sort of one half of the equation, but those are options we're looking at. Other options go along the lines of, again, looking at the over-enrollment and under-enrollment and looking at changing boundaries without adding additional classrooms to balance that mismatch between enrollment and capacity. So we are getting close to being able to provide our recommendations to the superintendent and do expect to be on time and on target to provide something for the board at the first meeting in February as an information item and then as an action item at the second meeting in February.
sorry, I forgot I needed to use the mic. Since we have this in two parts, I thought if there were specific questions from the board regarding this, we'd dialogue that, and then we'd move into the 612. And then I have some additional comments as well.
Any questions? Tracy?
So, as I understand it, Liz, is this the only option that you're going to present to the board before the recommendations are presented?
I'm sorry, one more time?
Is this the only option that you're going to present to the board before the recommendation is presented in February?
This was intended as an add-on to the special board meeting on the 12th, where I explored in greater detail many of the other options we're exploring. This was the one that we had done the least amount of work on, so I wanted to provide an update to the board on this item and give some more details that I had not provided at the other meeting.
Were there some other questions at that meeting about facilities, about using facilities, I think, that weren't exactly completely answered at that meeting, about using Island High School, using the other facility? Were you going to answer those as well, or can you answer those as well?
I'm actually taking it in a couple of steps. There are some questions that I'm able to incorporate and fit well within the report. The ones that I can't squeeze in because it was an outlier some way, I'm just going to sort of add in an appendix of all the questions that are left unanswered that I couldn't squeeze in.
Okay, and so, and just to summarize, you said that this discussion, which is kind of an extension of the January or December 12th workshop, you're just talking about options to address over-enrollment.
The charge of the task force was to explore options that would address the mismatch for both our over-enrolled and under-enrolled schools. So we are looking at options that address both.
But this option just is addressing over-enrollment by putting portables on certain sites.
Yes.
Thanks.
Any other? Mike?
I guess as just sort of feedback and direction, considering it was presented at the December 12th meeting and what you're presenting here, there appears to be a number of options or opportunities to make recommendations that have both short-term and long-term implications. And the question that we have is, you know, which ones are going to be the short ones versus the long-term, and how do we balance that off? But the other question or the other observation that I came away with from the December 12th meeting was the fact that some of these programs potentially are site-specific options to engage in a program, whether it be to address an undercapacity or overcapacity, really ultimately have to get down to a site level type of tailoring of the program. And it was really kind of struck me as to how are we going to address, or is there going to be the ability of a school site to, in essence, decide? For example, there were some options about reusing classrooms or changing programs at the site, like class size reduction, that could change the overall capacity of the things. But how would the school make that choice? Would the parents make the choice? I mean, would you even, or because that can't be decided at a site level, we wouldn't even bring that recommendation forward? I mean, that's what I'm trying to grapple with, is that how do we bring those that's the confusion I'm having, is that are these recommendations going to be sort of district recommendations that really only address district issues, and the school sites are basically going to be left with very little input?
I think
or are they going to get a smorgasbord of choices? In other words, for example, we know at Site A they need to address overcapacity, and they could potentially we have 3 or 4 different solutions that could address overcapacity. It could be A, B, and C options. Rather than dictate A, B, or C as a recommendation, would we allow a school site to pick A, B, or C? See what I'm saying? I guess is it going to be just district driven, or is it going to be site driven? I guess is really the problem I'm having, or I'm trying to get my head around in terms of the process and the feedback and all this other task force-y stuff that's going on. So that's
Let
my
me-
observation or my feedback, if it makes any sense.
Yeah.
Oh, did you?
If,
Well,
Yeah, no,
the.
I thought Lou said a comment.
Wasn't, yeah, I do, and let me offer this, just so that we're all clear about how we see the next steps happening. For the task force is charged with making recommendations to the superintendent. The superintendent will then make recommendations to the board. The task force, I'm going to take one of your examples, for class size reduction. We read through the notes. We had some of the task force members were present, others read through the notes, so we're all familiar with the conversation that occurred regarding eliminating class size reduction either by grade or by school. The task force then, as part of their recommendation to the superintendent, will have a discussion about what eliminating or reducing at one school site means, or 3 school sites. We have 3 that are expected to go over enrolled. What would that mean? The pros and cons given the facility, financial, and program impact, and then ultimately make a recommendation about what we think should happen with class size reduction across the district or by school site. The second example was your question about the miscellaneous rooms, the rooms that were used for purposes other than regular education or special education. For that, we really did want site-specific feedback. I've met with every principal, and we actually went and looked at the miscellaneous rooms, the use of those rooms, and then I pushed the question of what happens if we converted all 6 of these rooms. And then we did a tour. We walked room by room to try to figure out where could we place this function. If currently you have Title I services provided in this room, is there another place where you can provide this function? If you're using this current classroom for an after-school program, is there another room we can do this in? And at the special board meeting, I presented that list of all of the rooms used for miscellaneous purposes. As I'm updating the report, I now have the list that says, and these are the rooms the principals agree that we can convert. So we actually, I've been to sites very, very often, and it is in speaking with principals specifically to try to come up with what the best options are going to be. And some of it is going to be district-driven, and some of it will be site-driven, but it's definitely, we're not acting alone.
I guess one question I noticed in all of this discussion, there has been no discussion about changing these schools to, in the old facilities management report, of actually going year-round with them as a capacity enhancer. It's never been brought up, and I'm kind of wondering why that was totally ignored.
It's actually, it was included, came up on December 12th at that board meeting. So it's one of the items in the notes. And we've not actually gotten to discussing that one at length and the task force.
I don't remember class. You're right. That was double. I'm talking about the real use of double sessions where they use 3 out of 4. You're on 3, off 4. It's not year round.
Oh, I was thinking year round. I'm sorry.
talking about the
I'm
ability
sorry.
that's actually in the facilities report where you actually increase the capacity of a site by converting to a schedule that allows 4 sessions where you're on 3, off 1, and you continually use the school the entire year. That's what they do out like in Antioch and some other places to increase the capacity of the schools without actually adding portables and adding kids. Is they go 3 tracks, you're on 3 tracks and you're off 1,
Okay.
but you use the facility the entire 12 months, and I never saw that option, so I was kind of wondering why that was never considered.
Okay.
Hey, David?
thank you, Liz. I'm a little, I understand that staff needs a vote by the end of February on some short-term options. But the more I look at the calendar of events for the task forces, I'm a little worried that there's really actually between now and the 26th, no more, no workshop, apart from 3 minutes here, no opportunity really for public input. And we're potentially making some long-reaching decisions here. And so I'd encourage staff to maybe split up the short-term solutions and recommendations from long-term. While obviously they need to work together, but if that, or at least maybe that would be an option to allow time for public input and other public workshop.
Yes, at the December 12th meeting, we heard that message, and that is something that we're taking into account as we develop our recommendations.
Because I didn't hear that, and looking at the calendar, you know, superintendent recommends options to the board on the 12th, and then then we vote on the 26th, and there's no more workshops.
Oh, I'm sorry, just to clarify, what I meant when I said it would be included in it is included in the recommendations that the task force will make to the superintendent. We will note these are some short-term solutions and these are the long-term solutions. And then it sounds like with the long-term solutions, we should add on, and here are some other workshops we would need to hold in order to make some of these happen.
I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Janet?
Luce, did I miss it, or did you mention what the composition of the task force is?
I did not today. Let's see.
Might be good just to put that in the record, and how that. Well, go ahead. If I want to know how.
Sure. Okay. Now I'm going to end up forgetting somebody. It's myself, and I'm responsible for facilitating the work of the group. Our director of maintenance operations and facilities, Leland Knoll, is a member. We also have David Durking, who has a tremendous amount of history with the district, and I believe is sitting behind me somewhere. And he's our student services and compliance officer, I believe is his title. We also have from the district office, we also have she's someone I'm using on a tag team basis as I need information, and that's our coordinator of assessment, Lenny von Blankensee. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And then from the school sites, we also have numerous principals. We have Jeff Knoth, principal of Otis. We have Marquita Williams, the principal of Edison. We also have Joy Dean, principal of Earhart. Jan Goodman, the principal of Ruby Bridges. And I've also brought in Marlene Gursevich, who is a former principal and has a tremendous amount of history with the district as well.
Okay, so I would just have a question. It was mentioned, I think, in earlier on public comment. Why did we not have any teaching staff on the task force, or any parents? Was it since they've been intimately involved in this?
So, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I originally created the task force and presented it to the board, I saw this as a really internal work around our facilities and enrollment, and not about our program. And in fact, when we get to the secondary report as well, and from what we're hearing from the community, there is still the issue to be addressed about program and options at the K-5 level, and we need to build that into this process, and our intent is to look at that in K-12 as a whole, and we'll describe that a little more. But that was a deliberate decision to do it internal for this specific task.
I just would say that I do think we have to keep in mind that it's important to have people involved in whatever capacity they have in the district, who have a long overview of the district. And as we, you know, we hear all the time about baby boomers, but I know a lot of our staff is going to be retiring in the coming years. And we have many people who've only been here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but we do have, when there is a possibility of having some excellent people who have, you know, 20, 30 years of experience in seeing how things have moved and gone, and that collective knowledge is important, I think, to consider in getting input.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay. Debbie will handle the next part of this report.
Good evening, and you'll have to forgive my voice. It may go at any moment, and then I'll have to stop the presentation. Tonight is the first time you are hearing from the Secondary Educational Options Task Force. And one of the reasons is we had begun in October with a 5-member exploratory task force who began researching some options for the superintendent's pathway to excellence and equity. And since our meetings have just now concluded right before spring break, it's an excellent opportunity actually to share what we've learned and where we're going next. Our task force had this problem statement. And one of the major hurdles our schools were facing has been the inequity of elective program offerings, for instance, personnel and funding resources between smaller smaller enrolled schools compared to larger enrolled schools. And this problem's led to really inconsistent course pathways, programs, and services to kids. Our secondary task force charge, as you can see on the screen, these were our major outcomes. We're hoping to come out of this in the next several phases of this work. And at the same time that we're striving to ensure that all of our students are meeting high standards, our district is really undergoing tremendous change, tremendous pressure from outside forces to attract students to our public schools. And inevitably, this becomes an opportunity for us as an educational system to take a look at our good schools that we currently have and refine them to be the best schools. This is our original timeline. We just finished the initial exploratory task force in December. I also want to recognize the 5 members of the team that started with us in October, and these folks are Elise Castro from Island High School, Judd Kempson, who's behind me, from Chipman Middle School, Sean McFettridge, our Director of ROP and Post-Secondary Options, and the Principal of AUSD, and Wendy Ponder, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and myself as Facilitator. Their work hasn't ended. They're going to be with us for the long haul, but they began with doing some research, trying to look at what other districts are doing, not only around California, but across the nation, looking at best practices, best specialized programs, all kinds of unique options and opportunities, and then doing some deep research, studying it, asking questions. Some of the ideas explored thus far have included restructuring our middle and high schools, taking a look at reviewing grade span reconfigurations, for instance, developing magnet or specialized program offerings, expanding our career technical pathways. So those are some of the things we're looking at. We have specifically approximately 10 options we've deeply explored. And we're looking to expand the task force at this point from the 5 to about 13 or 14 member task force. And the reason for the size is to make it a doable task force, a task force that can really get down and dirty and get the work done. We're looking at including teachers, of course, CSEA representative, and parents on the task force. They will help expand these ideas, take a look at these 10 ideas that we have, and also expand it further with their own ideas. And then we'll bring it to the superintendent and bring some recommendations. Now, this is broad-based 612 secondary reform and restructuring efforts. The other piece, to answer the question about why not more folks on the task force, I do want to reiterate that the superintendent has designed in this pathway to excellence and equity a forum, multiple forums for two-way feedback, whether it is the sounding board that she is using, that she meets with, board workshops that we'll have in public in the public forum, and other stakeholder groups that she's that we're working with for two-way feedback. So we feel pretty confident that we're going to get a lot of feedback around our options along the way. I also want to tell you on the timeline that we have at this moment in time. We've added expanding the elementary voice for K-12 alignment in March. And the reason why we decided to do this, add this piece, is right after the board action in February, we're hoping, around what the structure is going to look like in our elementary schools. Then we can then take a look and take a look at designing what our program options are for our elementary schools as well. So we're adding, we will be adding elementary voice to the task force. That's not part of this 14-member task force that I'm talking about. That will be in addition to. This next slide, and excuse me, let me take a swallow. This next slide, we decided to, there has been various forums that we have encountered from November through December. And through these various forums, we've heard from our community the need to provide school options for the diverse learners in our community, in our schools. And as we continue to ensure all students meet high standards, students and families also want unique opportunities to explore sooner rather than later. We had an 18-month timeline for the task force, and we really wasn't planning to implement any new work until 09-10 school year. But with the feedback that we're getting, and we want to put something in place for the fall, and this is for the school year, this upcoming school year. So this option that you're looking at right now, one of our 10 options that we were looking at was just designing specialized programs in our schools that will entice students from across the district to say if they are interested in this science technology pathway, that this is the place to go to. This group, there's been some grassroots efforts. This Chipman Middle School is a program improvement school. They are looking ahead and being forward thinking around the years ahead as a program improvement school, knowing that in year 4 of program improvement, they will need to redesign and restructure the school. And so they're thinking ahead. And so they like to start off with one of the phases, which is this one up here on the screen, which is this, and the science department has been doing some researching. They are thinking of going green, and this is one of those areas, New Horizons, that is very much in the demand career-wise. And so it's environmental science that will include hands-on community services using our Bay Area local resources. The science department has been working on a pathway for this elective course offering for the fall, and we're going to, with district support, put this in place as phase 1 of this work. This is a specialized program, and the reason why we thought this would be right in line with the work that we're thinking is we're also looking ahead at our high school pathways around career technical pathways, and we are looking at going green, environmental science, looking at those career tech pathways, ROP programs along the way for our high schools. So this could be clearly an ideal pathway 6th grade through 12th grade. And we want to meet this student and community needs. So the coherence with this work that's already in progress, as I said, we're putting in the specialized program for the fall. It's a beginning phase, and the next several phases, the teachers also want to think about what school-wide program will look like along the way, and what the other content areas, and building the thematic instruction around perhaps the Go Green idea. And so they need some time to work on it, and so they're planning on using this spring, the rest of next year, to do some deep, thoughtful, deliberate planning, work with the district office and ed services around curriculum, resources, technology that they'll need to put in place, looking for grants and other resources to support the work. And so hopefully, you know, they're working on this now. They're meeting, and they have planned meetings. There's also focus groups going on that will help give us more information along the way. And so work is in progress. And my last slide, I want to share, well, what's up ahead? We understand that there's a huge desire from our community to build K-12 coherent pathways and taking a look at specialized instructional programs. So for 09-010, we're taking a look at one of our 10 options, which was expanding specialized programs at the West End schools. These are mostly under-enrolled schools. Washington Elementary, Chipman Middle School, and Snell High School, and putting in some specialized programs. And as I said, Chipman Middle School is already on the forefront beginning this work with their science pathway for the fall, which will lead into Snell High School's ROP career tech pathways as well. And then we'll take a look at Washington Elementary and work with the staff and the administration to see, you know, what is it that will make a coherent pathway K-12. So that's in the works for, this is our plan for 09-10. And the second bullet is very important to us. When you take a look at the green, environmental science, biotechnology, the arts media, these are things that we have been in Ed Services working on already because we wanted to expand our career tech programs. This is a new horizon. The state of California is giving funding for these arenas, and we want to be on the cutting edge for our 21st century students. And lastly, you're wondering how we're going to get all this work done. Behind the scenes, we also have this ongoing secondary educational options task force that will be continuing to explore not just these two specialized programs, but also the bigger picture. What does Lincoln, Wood Middle School, Alameda High School, Island High School, AUSD, for instance, what are those schools going to look like in the future? And these are all in phases at this point in time, and this is our future outlook. And we want to have something that 5 years from now we're going to be so proud of, that's working, that's sustainable, that's viable, that is working for kids and meeting kids' needs. That so we want the time to really do a good job and a deliberate job on planning this. So I welcome any questions.
I just wanted to add that in relation to the Chipman work, Debbie and I met with the principal and vice principal of Chipman today, and they're working intensely and moving forward at almost a pace that will say that I think there may be some further report to the board that we'll be bringing forward about where they are and what the program will be like. And they're planning to share with their incoming 5th grade parents and the work that they have begun and where they are. So what we've described so far is where they are, not where they may be as to what happens as of September, just to clarify.
Thank you. Questions? Tracy?
I have a question. Debbie, do we have other school districts or other in California or in the United States that you've looked at that have done something similar to this?
The
Are there
specialized
models?
programs?
Mhm.
Yes, yes.
And
We're stealing too. We're stealing
so you're looking
from other
at,
districts, yes. There are other course descriptions around the science pathway that we're looking at. So there's, yes.
Tracy?
Oh, thank you. Again, similar to the question that I asked of Luz, you mentioned there was 10 options that were being discussed by the work group, and now we're hearing about one of those options. Is this,
Specialized programs.
are we going to hear about the other 10?
Yes.
The other 9?
Yes, our calendar of events We have us also coming in to speak to the board as well. We'll have special workshops as well.
And in terms of the timing, this is the point where we need to add to the task force, and we want to get that in process so that they have the new group that will be formed, that will include the teachers and other representatives, will also have an opportunity to work with this and react to it then as we bring it forward from the community, because they may expand that or have some modifications. So that's in terms of the timing. This work was meant to be initial research and kind of a brain piece, and the next level is really to involve. These are what we've looked at. These seem feasible. What does this group think? And so there will be further refinement as it comes forward.
I also want to add that it looks like the 18-month timeline is too tight, and that the secondary, I think it's a continuing group for a little while, and it will take longer than 09-10 to complete this work. And we want to make sure that we're planning in phases, because now that we're doing these specialized programs, we want to make sure we do those well and thoughtfully. So as we're doing that work, we're also meeting with the secondary task force and coming up with options. But I may come back to you in future meeting to say we're going to be extending the timeline because we may not make it.
Debbie, what specialized programs that you're
The
doing?
specialized Chipman Middle School.
So this is already moving forward. This focus on science and technology,
Yes.
and this
Yes.
is a change in Chipman, and it's going to be a magnet school. But this isn't something that the board has to weigh in on or decide about or comment on, or?
You can comment on it. Here's what I also want to add. We have taken huge steps around instructional improvement. One of the things that I am very strong around is the secondary SIM work. This is the strategic instruction model SIM that we implemented this year. And I think about it in at least a 5-year plan. This is not something we launch one year and we turn around and try something the next year. This is one of those programs around instructional strategies and instructional tools for teachers we want to have in place for a long time. We want to know if it works. We want to know that it's making a difference. So underlying these specialized programs, we also are infusing and making sure we integrate our instructional tools alongside with it.
Oh, and I understand that, and I think, personally, I think that this is a great idea, but there's some statements in here and in other things about attracting other students, about making it a magnet program, et cetera, which would seem to me to go a little bit beyond just having a few curricular changes, or hiring staff that focus on a certain area. And that's my question, I guess, is that if this is really a secondary educational option that's being adopted, or that's been adopted already, I would have thought that we might have heard about it, or had an opportunity to approve it, or, had some input at least before it was put into place.
Would you like to comment on that?
No?
Yeah.
Wait 1 second. Go ahead.
Go on. You want me to? Okay. In which case, let's see, a couple of questions. In the elementary task force, they had some categories of solutions. Capacity, changing attendance boundaries, creating magnet programs. And so we're hearing about programs tonight.
Yes.
Is the task force addressing the other possible solutions?
We are, and we're in close communication with the elementary task force. So knowing what, as much as they're ready to make recommendations, we're right there listening with that. And that may make an impact or not. and depending what it is. And that's why adding the elementary, elementary task force members in March will be important. We are exploring, taking a look, some of the options, specific options we're looking at is 1 high school and 2 middle schools. One of the options we're exploring is a high school, 1 high school, but 2 campuses, east and west. Some of the other, so we have all kinds of restructuring options as well. We have grade level restructuring options, such as a 9th grade academy and a 10-12. We have taking a look at K-6s and 7-9, and that's why working with the elementary task force is really important.
Sounds like an excellent topic for another public workshop.
Huge, huge.
So tonight we heard just a programmatic
Right now,
solution to the issue.
we're putting into place a curricular focus. So for 08, 09, for Chipman, probably a year ahead of that we have to. But it's a good thing that we're starting to do that, because then it helps start to lead to the rest of the pathway as well around high school. So we are going to put in place the Chipman program, the science pathway. As the teachers are working on, they're going to take some time and work on what the rest of the school is going to be looking like, and thematic instruction, and along the way, those pieces. And I'll have more to report to you about those details. But yes, we are putting in
Because we're going to have some major, we have major imbalances right now, as you
Right.
stated.
Right.
And they're potentially going to get bigger. And magnets by themselves may not solve
it is
the-
not the only solution.
So,
definitely.
just
That's why we need the bigger task force now. We're ready for the rest of the folks to feel this pain.
so when might we? I see in April a community workshop to present initial secondary program options
Which includes restructuring options as well.
and boundary changes and.
What you heard
what-
from the
and-
elementary task force when Luce presented all the options
Mhm.
will be very simple. It'll be parallel.
Okay, so that'll be sometime in April.
Yes.
Thank you. And then my other comment would be, I had the opportunity to attend a meeting about the Chipman program on Sunday. Was very impressed. My initial thought, or an initial thought, is that for this to work as a magnet, people need to know it's there. And while I'm sure we've got a great TV audience tonight, given that the 5th grade middle school night, I think, are coming up within the month, I'm curious as to what plans the district, or Chipman specifically, has to market this program to, I'm thinking specifically the Lincoln area, but basically district-wide, to fill up some of those classrooms in Chipman.
Definitely Judd has a plan for the Chipman Information Night, and we will be working on communicating to the school sites.
I'm sorry.
I also need to say that what I saw this as, there is going back to that rationale piece that we were talking about, we have to acknowledge that Chipman is in program improvement status. And with that potential facing us in terms of options and decisions the district would need to be forced, the work at Chipman that has been going on as it went through SATE and involved in program improvement, we have what I would call a grassroots, almost very developed place that they are at, and it made logical sense, since we knew we would be going down a pathway of specialized programs, for us to give the green light and agree let's do this work because it will fit in the long-term work that we know we're at. So part of Member Jensen's question, I'm trying to respond to your question of the logic of this and the board's role. And I still see this as programmatically what we've been talking about in terms of curriculum and the direction the district's been going and looking at the ROP program and options and choices. So
I agree wholeheartedly.
so in that vein, it is currently being promoted for the Chipman community and wider, as we know, in terms of open enrollment and our process for identifying schools. It's based on space available, and there's an open enrollment window that is coming up in January and February actually. That is another opportunity as Chipman continues to develop this, that we can explain it and to answer your question in terms of potential marketing piece.
So it will get marketed to district-wide to other elementaries, not just to the Chipman area?
Community.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Mike?
David sort of touched on it, and it's just an observation that I have, that it seems that the way we created the task force, that the elementary for some reason has a facilities focus, and the secondary has a program focus, and you even alluded to the fact that you were going to wait till the elementary group finished before you started looking at program, and the initial recommendations from that elementary task force actually didn't even want to go into the program area at all. And so I'm kind of wondering, because of the nature of the beast in terms of the amount of knowledge and expertise that's needed, it almost seems like we need to realign the task forces so that there's a facilities focus that's K-12 and there's a program focus that's K-12, because I can't believe that your group is now going to take all the time and energy and effort that the elementary task force did on the inventory of classrooms and all of the additional vagaries of how to learn. It just seems like once you've comprehended the terms and all the things, it doesn't make sense that you guys are going to have to gain expertise in the facility side and have to be able to make those type of recommendations. So, I mean, we've already done what we've done, and we need to move forward with our recommendations. But if we're going to restructure this, I would think that we'd almost have two groups that are. There's going to be overlap because chicken and egg, obviously, but there's some. It came up pretty clearly in the elementary workshop that once we started talking about these things, they had impacts that went up the continuum. So even for facilities.
Yeah.
It's just an observation, and we can. And I'm sure the superintendent will deal with it in coming things. But the other option I will make is, once again, I don't like to say I told you so, but the problem we're running into with these task forces is, once again, this whole disclosure issue.
Yes.
Right now, I'm really shocked. I mean, to be really blunt, I'm really shocked that we went ahead and this is our first update on the secondary options. We've got a written presentation that's being distributed, but you just named 5 or 6 options that are nuclear options in this district that would fill up this room if you talked about creating one high school or two middle schools. And that's the nature of this process, is that if you guys are seriously looking at those options, how do we engage the community in a way that gives them opportunities to engage in a transparent manner, and all the other things? That's the problem I'm having with this whole process, is that it's all of a sudden going to come on from high again. So once again, just be real careful about this. We need to continue to try to be as transparent as possible.
Any other question? I'd like to, one more? Yeah. Tracy?
With regard to the slide, the options task force and the schedule again, since my question's been answered and this is the first option that's been adopted without board input, the recommendations to the board in September, will those include are those all going to be programmatic options, or are they going to be?
Our major charge in one of the first slides that shows our charge basically was really to develop high quality secondary educational programs. So really it is a program focus, and whether or not we align, reconfigure schools, or it all look through the lens of high quality programs for students. What's the best educational model? And as frightening as some of these do sound, and what we did as part of our process of the 5 of us is we threw out all the ideas that we've heard, and so we did an initial brainstorm. They came out to these 10 ideas, and then our process was taking a look at, well, what are the strengths of it? What are the areas of need and more research that needs? What are questions? Who's doing this well out in the world? And then knowing that K-6 model, for instance, in a 7-9 and a 10-12 reconfiguration most likely will not be feasible because of facility use, that gets kind of checked off and pushed to the side. We looked at it, and we knew it wasn't feasible. We moved it aside. We concentrated on something else. One of our other options is looking at magnet programs across all 3 middle schools. There's reasons and rationale for all of these that we have set, but yes, I understand the context of how we have to communicate and hear from the broader base folks. That's why I said I'm happy to expand this task force at this moment in time, share the pain, and go out in the world and share it with others and get feedback, like we always do.
And finally, to Member McMahon's point, I like this idea. I think it's great. I think it'll be great for Chipman. It'll be great for any pathway from Washington or Payton or other schools. But also, if this does happen, this could reduce potentially the need for increased facilities in other schools that are impacted right now. There may be parents. I'm a parent of a first grader, and I may say, wow, I'd like to go to Washington so I can have this pathway to Chipman for my son. So
yeah,
it
is a moving target along the way, and we're doing this work but hopefully we're doing it thoughtfully, right? With research, and we want research-based options. So, and we're looking at good models out in the world. And doesn't mean that it's right for Alameda either. So there's the Alameda context. How does it fit in our district?
I'd like to ask our student board members if they have any questions. Allison?
I have 2 questions, actually. You mentioned in the PowerPoint that you were going to increase the number of task force members to 13 and 14 members. Are these increases in members going to be representatives from AHS or NSNAL?
Yes, yes. All secondary schools will be represented.
Okay. And my second question is, you presented an option that has basically attracted students to under-enrolled schools, but are there any options that help alleviate, I guess, the crowdedness of over-enrolled schools?
Like Alameda High School?
Yeah.
That's one of the main reasons why we're looking at this work is we have 2 high schools. One has 1,100 students and one has 2,000 students. And so if in designing a program, for instance, at Encinal High School, which would attract kids who are really interested in pursuing an environmental science pathway, the Go Green concept, for instance, and Encinal High School is the school to go. It may be it's open enrollment at Encinal High School, and you may want to pursue that pathway. And so it could lure and entice kids from Alameda High School to Encinal High School, maybe helping with that enrollment balance.
Okay. Mike?
Just one more that I challenged the elementary task force, so unfortunately you get stuck with it also, is...
I'm not challenged enough.
Well, I'm just pointing out, and this is my...
Right.
Once again, I'm back to where I'm at, is one of the the challenges that we've had in the past when we had these meetings for budget cuts is we get to the point where we have the community meeting and we present the option and everybody goes, well, what do you mean the option? Because didn't you think about all these other options? And the fact is, it appears that this group is in fact got 10 options and they're narrowing them down and doing the things. What they did is they ended up presenting all the options they explored and then had to document why they dropped those options. So I would hope and expect that these 10 options would be published as quickly as possible, as prudently as possible, and with a rationale so that people could actually say, because the one that they dropped was the program option, the K-5, and the feedback came back pretty loud and clear, why are we dropping it? So there may be options that you're going to drop that are facilities ones that we're going to go, the community's going to go, maybe not. So I'm just, that's my whole stick.
David?
And Debbie, while I understand the need to proceed deliberately, I would also submit that, and while I'd also submit that, agree that Chipman was ready for something. The very fact that Chipman's as far along as it is shows me, and I have heard, numerous places that there is a demand for moving faster. So I would caution you not to let this timetable slip, or ask to keep pushing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Debbie, just one thing, and this is so complex, I realize it's like a kaleidoscope, and each time you shake it, it all comes a new design.
That's a good one.
But in terms of like the pathways, when you're talking about ROP courses, on ROP courses, I think students have to be 16 to enter them. So you're talking usually about junior and senior year.
Yes.
And so I mean, this then poses you have a program at Chipman, and then you have 9th and 10th graders, and that means you have to develop a whole new program because they're not really, I mean, you have a ROP potential program, but then you have to do something. So I realize everything, it's
Yeah, the other horizon is the career technical education, which goes 7 through 12.
okay.
So, and that's where there's money there for our taking.
Yeah. Well, I realize that all of this can be worked out, but as each, and I think Mike's idea of looking at both the whole pathway in terms of curriculum and then in terms of facilities. And because what we are going to have to, we'll come to some real barriers and blocks. What if this? Then you can't do it this way. You have to do it this way. And I think we just need to get a clearer picture as we focus in on the essential elements.
Okay, thank you.
The commentary. We have a couple of speakers on this item. First is Patricia Sanders.
Hello again. I just wanted to make a couple of points, and you had asked about the teachers wanting to have input, and most definitely at the elementary, at least at our executive board level, we have been asking repeatedly to have representation and have been anxiously wanting that. And not only for ourselves, but we think there should be representation of all the stakeholders. And I'm a little disappointed to hear some of what's been said tonight, because when you bring stakeholders together at the beginning, and I think this goes to your point, and a point, Mike, that you made early on in the school year when the Pathway to Excellence was just being brought forward, that you could do all this work in task forces, and then you end up with, ultimately, you guys have to make the decision. And I think if you bring people in at the beginning and you let them participate in the brainstorming and the pain of the process, not to rubber stamp what's already been decided by a few group of people, but to come in and generate the ideas, you get buy-in, you have the community involved, you have the teachers involved, you have the various different unions and associations involved. And I know that's something that we feel we would like to have, is that input, to really be a stakeholder and not someone who comes in later on after the decisions have been made. It doesn't make sense. And I think that, again, I challenge the board to give direction that this be done differently than how you've done business in the past, because maybe you have asked for input in the past, but you end up with these meetings where people are very unhappy, and I can already hear from some of what's gone on. I can go back to my members. I know that there's going to be many who are going to approach me and say, what do you mean this has gone on? Why is this happening this way? Why weren't we involved in the process? And so I think you need to consider giving direction to the district to do things in a way that are much more inclusive and bring the stakeholders clearly to the table to be able to participate actively in the process. And then you're going to have what you want in the end. You're going to have a community that's united behind something, or at least has had the opportunity to buy in or say, no, we don't like this. You do it up front instead of trying to put out fires on the backside. So really that was the main point, other than to really bring all the stakeholders. And that includes not just teachers, but the association and CSEA, all the associations in to what needs to be done. So thank you.
Thank you. Ron Mooney.
Good evening, Mr. President, board members. So I actually sitting here tonight am excited about what I hear. I've been involved in a school district that is 1/10 of the size, and the rework and the redesign that they've done, and it takes years and a tremendous amount of resources to make that happen. So my recollection as your superintendent rolled out this process in September, October, certainly Mr. McMahon, board member McMahon is right. He's going to say, I told you so, and he's going to continue to say, I told you so. But what you're grappling with isn't something that's a 6-month or a 12-month or an 18-month timeline. I think what you're looking at is, what are our public schools in this community going to look like over time? And that work doesn't happen in a few months. And I heard that at this point in time was when, after some of the basic data got put out, then more groups would be created. And I think probably the one thing that isn't quite clear, and that I would hope that the board would step up and take leadership on, is more community workshops that are board workshops, where you sit there and say, hey, what do you want? Unfortunately, it's going to be so messy. It's like a city's general plan, quite frankly. And very frankly, with your lack of outside resources, money, facilitators to make this work, we're stretching our staff and our teachers so thin to ask them to do all this work, but it's got to for the long run of the school. And I dare say some of you board members won't be here when this work is done. And in fact, if you think about it on a long range cycle of inquiry, I think this district is very familiar with, is that process that you're doing. But at this point in time, I think it's wonderful that we're starting to look around, and I hope that instead of maybe using the phrase with a little humor to the assistant superintendent of sharing the pain, let's share the excitement and the passion. And yeah, it's going to be a little painful, and there's going to be some arguments. Maybe in this televised setting was the first time somebody brought up, well, geez, what if there were 2 campuses and one high school and 2 campuses? But that actually came up last June in a public meeting where people started asking questions like that. So people are asking, people are excited about this process. Not necessarily that everybody agrees, but I hope you support your superintendent, not only in her staff in doing it, but also the school board starts holding public hearings and saying, hey, give us your input. Let's have some of the messy meetings and record down what you get. And I would submit that it'll be very messy, and board member McMahon will have a hard time keeping all the facts straight.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next agenda item, G4, Budget Development Calendar for, I'm sorry, G3, Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement 45. Yeah, how could I skip that one? GASB 4. I think I wanted to skip that one. Accounting, financial reporting by employers.
I have an audience still. I can't tell you how exciting that is for me. Good evening. This is something, there are a couple of acronyms here that you've been hearing for a while now. So this is going to be my opportunity to go into those acronyms with greater detail. GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Boards, sets standards for local and state governments on how we prepare our financial statements. OPEB
is other post-employment benefits. And I was actually recently asked the question of other than what? It's other than pensions. So pensions are a part of that total compensation package, and we do set money aside for that. Anything other than pensions is what we're going to talk about tonight. This is probably going to be the first of a couple of presentations on this topic. My hope tonight is to provide you with enough of an overview so that when you receive the actuarial evaluation, you'll be able to get through it. So we're not going to become masters at it this evening, but that's the goal, is just to give you enough information so that when you read it, you can make sense of it. And then I do see one more presentation eventually where we have to come up with a plan on how we're going to approach or implement GASB 45 in this district. For our district, we are set to implement GASB 45 in this upcoming fiscal year. So a quick overview of what we're going to do. I'm going to go over my favorite acronyms, and then these are the 4 areas that I'm going to cover. Most of it will be actually on the what will the AUSD do piece of the presentation. All right, I actually need to go one more. That's good. These are my 3 favorite acronyms. GASB, as I mentioned, is the Government Accounting Standards Board. They set the standards for us, and those standards for our financial records are aimed at making public agencies accountable to constituents. So the idea, when they set a standard for us, is to put us in a position where we prepare our financial statements and it's usable by a constituent. So people should be able to read our financial records and know what it means. These standards are not laws, and GASB has absolutely no enforcement authority. They cannot make us comply with any of their standards. But to be clear, we do indeed comply with their standards. So while we're not required to, it's not law, we do indeed comply with them. And the reason we comply with them is because GASB is seen as the sort of one-all be-all for government, what are called generally accepted accounting principles or practices. So these practices are checked every year by our auditors, and if they're checked every year by your auditors, you can be guaranteed we're going to comply with them. Our auditors are going to have, are probably going to add on a day to their site visit with us next year in order to be able to do this piece of their audit. OPEB, as I mentioned, is anything other than a pension, and one of the points I want us to all sort of start learning is that these benefits are benefits that are earned during employment and taken after retirement. So every day that I come to work, I am earning a benefit that I will not receive until after I retire. That is true for every one of our employees, and that is what GASB 45 is focused on, is we have this expense that's coming along that doesn't actually, a check isn't written for it until the long term, but it's an expense that we incur today. Can you go back one for me, Kathleen? Okay, the intent of GASB 45. So the question here is, why was it issued? Historically, governments have financed OPEB on what's called a pay-as-you-go basis. We receive the invoice, we pay for it. But that invoice is only for the current year. So whatever we receive for that current year is what we're paying for. The promise of the benefit from today is not shown anywhere, and those unfunded liabilities are expected to actually grow pretty drastically. So in this case, what GASB has essentially determined is that our financial statements are incomplete. We're only reporting a portion of the benefit that our employees are receiving. We are not accounting for that future benefit, that promise that we've made to them. Today they earn a benefit, we've promised it to them, it's in contractual language, but it doesn't show up anywhere in our financial statements. GASB 45 says you have to show that liability in your financial statements. All right, so why does this suddenly matter now? Obviously, our financial statements have presumably been incomplete for many, many years. Why does it matter now? It matters now because the two variables which determine the cost of that liability, the number of retirees and the cost of health benefits, are going up. So everyone knows baby boomers are going to start retiring, so the number of retirees that we will see will start to increase. I don't have to tell anyone that the cost of health and welfare is going up and has been going up at double digits over the past couple of years. As those two things occur, the portion of our budget that will be used to fund those retiree benefits is going to go up. GASB wants us to take that into account and start thinking about how we're going to fund for these two increases. All right, so what changes? Seemingly not that much. Benefits are still going to be earned during employment. So every day I go to work, I earn part of that benefit. I won't receive it until after employment, until after retirement. The difference comes in when it's expensed. So GASB's determined that for good accounting practices, the cost of OPEB should be recognized when the promise is made, when it's earned, not when you actually pay it off, which is many years down the line. So the new standard, that last line shows, does not require us to fund that liability. There's no requirement for funding it. And as I mentioned before, GASB doesn't have any enforcement authority over us. There are, however, some pretty quick ramifications to not funding, which I'll discuss a little later on. But it is not required to be funded. So what are we currently doing to implement GASB 45? Our first step is to hire an actuary, which we've done. The actuary has actually completed the valuation, and I have a copy now of a draft report. The two variables that I've included up there, the benefit program and the people, I've included because those are the key pieces of data that determine the cost and liability of providing OPEB. When this step is actually complete and we have a final report, our actuary will present that to the board, and we're going to get a sense of some figures. Once we learn what our liability is, we're going to have to take a look at what assets are available to pay for that liability. And just to prepare the board and the audience, so I say this once and I'm going to go visual here. When we get the results of step number 1, it will be a liability somewhere up here. When we take a look at the results of step number 2, our assets are going to be somewhere down here. Our plan, our number 3, is to figure out a way to make them match up. Chances are the number we get as a result of the actuarial valuation is going to be a pretty unfriendly number. Any questions?
Do we have an order of magnitude?
It will be in the millions. I'm hoping not the tens of millions. And I say tens plural. We could hit 10. I'm hoping not on the tens of million. Okay, these 3 terms here are going to be in the actuary report, and not the easiest concepts to understand, but very important concepts to understand. Those are going to be 3 numbers we're going to see and that are going to be very important in how we think about what we're going to do about our liability. The first, the actuarial accrued liability, the AAL. You can think about this figure as the value of OPEB that's already been earned. So the value of OPEB that was generated last year, the year before that, and just keep going on. It's that history of benefits that we've been promising. It's the value of that. That will be, and what I'm hoping is the 10 of millions and not the tens of million. The annual OPEB cost represents, I don't think I can explain this one without telling you how it's calculated. So think of it this way. Every year, we write a check for benefits. So if you take the value of the check we will write next year, the check we will write the year after that, and keep going down the line. So that cash flow, those checks we write, and then we discount it for the present value. It's the present value of all that cash that it's eventually going to leave our district to pay for those benefits.
So, yeah, quick.
Yeah.
And it might be wise to get the board and the definitions of these, but
Sure.
Save you going through this again. But on that annual OPEB cost, is that then presented as one figure or as a figure for each year?
It's a figure for each year. So the value of that cash flow, those checks written this year, and we'll do it next year and the year after. If annual OPEB cost doesn't make sense right now, I think with the next definition it starts to become a little clearer. The annual required contribution. So this is the dollar amount that we have to write out based on meeting the actual GASB 45 requirement. So it becomes that amount that we have to pay off this year. That check we'll write this year is going to include two components, the normal cost and the accrued liability. So it means next year when we have to comply with this, I'm going to write a check. That check is going to be for the current year expenses, plus I have to start paying off that unfunded liability that was generated from before. So next year, I'm going to have to pay for that year's worth of services. When Debbie goes to work from July 1 to June 30th, we're incurring a liability for those benefits that we will owe her, that promise. So next year, I have to write a check for that value of that promise, plus I have to start paying off all that money that I owed for the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that. We have to sort of, what GASB 45 is going to force us to do is keep up with the current so we don't go behind, plus we have to start to amortize the prior years. So we have to pay off a little bit at a time of all that prior year liability that we've accumulated and just never shown anywhere. Have I lost everybody?
Yes. Just a question. Given that most of us baby boomers already understand that Medicare is going to bankrupt our system before Social Security does, because of some of the assumptions that are involved, there are some big assumptions in the calculations. One is life expectancy, one is the expected increase in healthcare costs, third one is obviously the discount rate to get to present value. How much input, negotiation power, do the districts / counties have in working with the actuaries in determining that liability, or do we just take what they say as gospel and then allocate it?
That's a great question, and I'm going to say it to make sure everyone heard it. There are a lot of assumptions that go into building up these three numbers that are very important to us, that are going to tell us how we're going to make a plan and how to fund. So if we think about my interim reports, I give you about 4 pages worth of assumptions, and that's not even all of the assumptions. This is many more pages of assumptions. Some of them are based on the people. Some of them are based on the program we provide. Some are based on economic factors. So those assumptions are not taken as gospel. We have some recommended assumptions that come from CalPERS. CalPERS is the organization from which we purchase health and welfare benefits. We purchase our health and welfare benefits through CalPERS. CalPERS has a set of, they have to figure out every year what their unfunded liability is. They have a set of assumptions about what age, the participation rate. They have many, many assumptions. All those assumptions are spelled out in the report. And I wouldn't call it a negotiation necessarily that we do with the actuary. The charge I assigned to them when we started this was to take our data and then build assumptions based on that data. I wanted the assumptions to reflect our real life experience. Other districts that with whom I've been in communication with, I know started with, let's talk about the assumptions. I do not believe you can develop assumptions without first looking at the data. And the assumptions that I wanted included in that actuary study should be based on our real experience and not based on numbers that'll get us to the right place ultimately.
Thank you. Yep. Tracy?
Thanks. Liz, well, you kind of answered one of my first question. If liability isn't shown in our financial statement, how do we account for the financial expense? And then you showed the slide, what will change, provides that the liability occurs in the current year. And so, to that end, how can, and this kind of goes to the President's question as well, how can the liability be estimated for future years if we don't know the rate of inflation, we don't know the change, the increase in health benefit costs, et cetera?
Right. Assumptions are made about what those increases will look like.
Assumptions coming from the state, I guess, or
some
GASB?
actually from CalPERS is one. The other is from our actual, they're Alameda specific. So for example, when we have them look at the increases in health and welfare, let's do that one. There's a difference in what that increase looks like if you live on the northern part of California than if you live in the southern part of California or if you live in Iowa. Those are very different assumptions because you're experiencing different increases. So the actuary will take into account what happens on this part of the country, because everybody has to follow GASB 45. It's not California specific. This is everyone. All state and local governments are doing this.
Are they taking into account where all retirees are
Yeah.
are getting their benefits? I mean, or is it just kind of a generalized, the number of our retirees and the proportion of benefits?
It's a great question. When we started the actuary study, we had to provide 2 pages worth of single-spaced data. They had a very long list of data that they needed from us in order to be able to come up with the study. That data includes census data, which says, here are all of our employees, here's where they are currently in the salary schedule, here's their hire date, and here's what our retirees look like. It spells it all out, all the way down to, for our retirees, they know which ones are purchasing health and welfare through CalPERS, which ones live in Nebraska, and what system they're purchasing it from. It's very detailed data. And of course, you have to take that data and you make assumptions from it, but they did take extensive data.
And is there, have you thought about or calculated the point when we will be in compliance and we won't be paying, no longer paying for current expenses, and we will be only paying for future liability?
I don't have the final figures yet on these amounts, but that'll be a
Not the amounts, but the timeline, I guess. You know, what, like 10 years?
Right. That's going to highly depend on how we go about addressing this liability, which I'll speak a little to more a couple of slides down, but it really depends on how we approach it. There are several ways we can look at this liability and what we choose to do with it.
See the segue.
Thank you.
Let me interrupt the segue for a second. So all these assumptions that are going into generating this ARC, are they updated annually? And so each year, at some point during the year, we get a new ARC number?
That's a very good question. It's actually not every year, it's every 2 years. Every 2 years, we have to do a new valuation So that's a new ongoing cost for the district to meet this requirement. So every 2 years, we will have actuaries here, and they're going to take another look at what's happening. So it's always a current figure.
Thank you.
Is this another unreimbursed, reimbursable cost?
They're not even intending to reimburse it, so there's no
Okay.
no pretending on that one.
All right, just curious. Okay.
All right. Step 2 is to identify available assets to fund that liability. Just as a reminder to the board and for the sake of the audience, we currently operate on what's called a pay-as-you-go basis. So we only pay for the current cost of providing a benefit in the current year. We have not set aside dollars specifically to pay for this liability. As a reminder, we do have $1.08 million set aside as part of the mandate cost reimbursement for the potential of an audit. The audit window will close next fiscal year, which is when we have to comply with this. For purposes of calculating OPEB, or what's called an employer contribution to meet OPEB, GASB has been very narrow, has a very narrow definition about what we can count. So they've pretty much come down and said, you have to really set aside real money. Can't be an intention, can't be an earmark. It has to be handed over, check written and handed over to someone else as in a trust in order to count toward meeting this liability. So they actually even further narrowed it down because the board for GASB is made of city and state officials, and I think they knew what all of us would do to meet this liability, and so they specifically came down and said, you cannot earmark dollars. So we cannot set aside a portion of our fund balance and say, this is for OPEB. That will not count toward meeting this liability. And the thinking in that case is setting money aside that way only means we intend to use these assets to finance that liability. They don't want an intention. They want us to take the dollars and set it aside so it's protected from, what is the line? It's protected legally from any creditors for the employer. So it's real money, really set aside, no options.
And how does this money get invested? Is there a pool, county pool? Is there?
Great question, which I would love to hold off into my next slide, because it does. There's some possibilities here. No more questions on this one. That third step is to match our assets with our liabilities. So you're asking about pre-funding. So if we put money aside and we pre-fund that liability, we just acknowledge it's a liability, it's a promise we've made, we're going to eventually have to pay it off, let's start setting money aside for it. We, as a government agency, are very limited in the types of investment strategies we can follow. If we pre-fund, we have to write a check, put it in a trust, for example, our investment strategies actually become a little more flexible. So whereas government we would never assume an interest rate above 5%. If you go and pre-fund and put the money aside in a trust, you can possibly get an 8% return on your investment, plus the interest earned on it. So there is, the pre-funding option is being shared. I know at every meeting I go to, it's the one where we're being recommended to go and being guided along that way. And that's for several reasons. One, it's going to be harder on our cash. That's going to be a bigger check we have to write in any given year in the short term. But eventually, we keep writing those checks, we'll start earning interest on it, we'll have investment earnings on it, so that hopefully in the long term, we're not writing such big checks. It's also much softer on our fund balance. So if we do not pay for that liability, our net assets will go negative because that OPEB liability will show up as a negative net asset. Creditors do not like negative net assets. The pay-as-you-go option will get us down that route. Pay-as-you-go, without a doubt, is easier on our cash in the short term. It's easier to write a check for the $600,000 than it is for the, say, $1 million+ that we might see a bill for when we implement GASB 45. But we are going to suffer in terms of what this might mean for our credit. And of course, if we don't have a good credit rating, our cost of borrowing dollars will very quickly go up. The non-funding option, I want to touch on a little bit. GASB 45, this will be the first year where folks have to become compliant with it. One of the options for not funding is, or non-funding, not funding, non-funding, is to issue debt called OPEB bonds. That might have been a phrase. I'm not sure. I think that was subconscious. OPEB bonds. And what I've read so far on it is interesting. I don't know where I will land on recommending it without some additional research, but it's interesting, and it looks like some of the large school districts like LA are considering possibly going down this line. The one piece I do have to point out about these different options is with pay-as-you-go, just philosophically, if you think about it, it means that you're going to be using future year dollars to pay for promises we made last year and the year before. Now, obviously, their goal is always to tie current year dollars with current year expenses. You want that time alignment. And I'm not sure OPEB bonds will actually get us there either. That's probably more of a personal opinion than a CFO opinion.
I just have a comment that the OPEB bonds, basically, we can issue them, and we basically issue them at a municipal tax-free rate. Mm-hmm. And we're basically arbitraging the investment return we expect, which should be theoretically above the tax-free rate, and hopefully the excess return will more than compensate for the risk that we're taking. But that's a timing issue, mm-hmm. and it can work for counties and states that generate tax revenue and have taxing ability. I'm not sure that since we are subject to state and federal payments that are not under our control, that is similar in nature. And so I'm just wondering, as a school district, are we in the position to be taking those types of risks?
I sort of mentioned earlier, I'm not so inclined to, based on the research I've done. You mentioned the sort of that you sort of hope for those arbitrage earnings. Mm-hmm. As a school district, as a public entity, we're not allowed to earn them. Any amount over what, any arbitrage earnings, we have to write a check right back to the federal government to pay for it.
Interesting. So we can't even take advantage of that. Oh, right. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, it's an interesting idea. I'm waiting to see if LA actually takes a look at it, but I don't see immediate benefits for it, and I think the timing is quite inappropriate. All right, so next steps for us are going to be to have that presentation by our actuary. Well, you're going to get to see those three numbers that I discussed earlier. Those are going to be three very important numbers for us. Depending on the size of those numbers, I'll do my research and bring back to the board options and recommendations for how we go about matching that liability to the assets to make sure that we stay fiscally solvent and on good financial ground.
Okay, any questions? David?
Question that may be timely. Do charter schools have to be GASB 45 compliant?
Yes, charter schools are public schools, and as such, they would be required to meet that guideline.
And so, in our oversight capacity, it's fair to ask charter schools what their GASB 45 plans are. Are they on the same timeline as us, given that?
Yes, they are a part, any of our charter schools are part of the district, and so their work falls in within the same time frame as ours.
So by the end of this fiscal year, we need to know what charter schools' GASB 45 plans are. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
Okay, thank you. And so you'll communicate that to them if you haven't already?
I will.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move to the next item, G4, Budget Development Calendar for 2008-2009. Not that, not the budget.
Good evening.
Move approval.
Yeah.
All right. The budget development calendar is a tool. It's not a requirement. It's a tool we use and develop every year to outline a time frame for ourselves so that we know what actions need to be taken, who's going to be responsible, and what the time frame is to ensure that we have a budget ready for adoption by June 30th, which is our requirement. I want to point out that today the governor did what is called a State of the State address, and 2 days from now, on January 10th, he's going to present his proposed budget for the state. So the governor's proposed budget for the state is our source of revenue. The state has announced a $14 billion structural budget deficit. That means they're spending $14 billion more than they're making in revenue. So they're in the process of thinking about how they're going to actually reduce, let's say, because I don't think they're making plans to eliminate, but plans to reduce that deficit. On Thursday, we will hear how the governor plans to go about doing that. At this point, there is much serious conversation about possible reductions in the current year and reductions in the following year. Of course, at this point, it's all conversation and speculation, but I think it's important for the board and the public to know that the state has recognized a $14 billion budget deficit, and let's say in hopes of being responsible, are making plans on how they're going to address that shortfall. So our calendar currently has all of those major points in time and the major tasks we need to complete in order to have an adopted budget. Depending on what comes forth on January 10th, we may need to add to this timeline in case there are additional meetings we need to have, depending on what exactly the state releases on Thursday. Just actually for you guys, because this is new for you, the governor gives us his proposed budget on January 10th. Come May, the governor will provide his revision to that. So there's a lot of room for change, but we always have to develop our budget based on the best information available at any point in time.
Okay. Any questions? Mike? For the public, the comment you made about the current year reductions would mean the money that we were promised to be received for this year, in other words, our $5,777 per student funding, could potentially be cut this year, even though all of our expenses are basically locked and loaded. And we have until typically under normal budget reduction cycles, February 28th, when we have to adopt recommendations. So if, for example, on the 10th, a Thursday, there's a recommendation to reduce the current level funding for this year, which would necessitate budget cuts, will we be able to react fast enough in this fiscal year to enact those budget cuts?
Unfortunately not. By the time the governor gets around to announcing his plans on January 10th, we have spent half of our fiscal year. We make plans based on what the state indicates they're going to fund us. We spend according to those plans. There's no way for me to go back and take a portion of everybody's paycheck. What's done is done. We've made promises, we've made commitments, we have obligations, and we would go forth. Usually, the mid-year spending reductions are the most difficult to implement because they're in the middle of the year. You've already made your plans for the year. You've spent at least half of it. So going in and changing course of action that quickly is very difficult to do. We have requirements about when we can reduce staffing. We have requirements about, I wouldn't call them requirements, but we have very clear guidelines about what we can do in terms of our programs and how we can make changes to our programs. We have a lot of compliance requirements that we cannot adjust. So changing in the middle of the year is a very difficult task, and what most school districts, actually what most public agencies end up doing if there is a mid-year reduction, is take the blow and then implement freezes, which means if a position becomes vacant and you can leave it vacant for the balance of the year, then you try to do that. That's pretty hard on staff. That's pretty hard on the folks we serve. I mean, can you imagine having a classroom, a teacher resigns, you have to fill it. There's nothing else you can do. You have to fill that position. So we don't have that sort of flexibility to cut back in a quick fashion. You know, we're not private sector that can make adjustments easily here and there to their budgets to accommodate a mid-year spending reduction. So it would be very, very tough. Freezes that we could implement are usually on the non-personnel side, the non-people side. And again, most of our expenses are locked in place. We have to pay for utilities. We have to pay for insurance. We have to pay for our audit. We have to pay for our financial software. There's no one doing that. So mid-year spending reductions are very, very tough on public agencies, including school districts.
And so that would then require us to cut more from next year.
That's correct.
And that would require some very quick decisions to be made before the middle of March.
Yes.
Can't make them. Any other questions? Thank you for that blunt picture.
Very welcome.
We need to approve this?
Yes, we do. We need a motion to approve the budget development calendar.
Move approval of the budget development calendar as submitted.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have first motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Next item, we'll move the student board member reports so that they can get home at a timely hour. Allison, would you like to lead it off?
Good evening. Before winter break, basically all leadership has been doing is focusing on fundraising for our charities. And our annual fundraiser during the winter season is called We Share, which is where leadership students go around to each classroom in the school and solicit for donations to help less fortunate families. And this year we got $4,400, which is a little less than last year, but pretty good nonetheless. We also had our winter assembly 2 weeks before winter break, and it went well. We also got a lot of donations for Toys for Tots bin as well, and Red Cross was sponsoring that, and several students went to volunteer to hand out Toys for Tots at Christ Church. But in other news, speakers and representatives from Yale University and the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising will be visiting the Alameda High and be speaking to prospective students on January 10th. A mock SAT sponsored by the AVID class will be held February 2nd for juniors or underclassmen who are planning on getting more practice for SATs. A college financial aid workshop will be also held January 10th in the pit after school, and we're expecting a lot of seniors for that. Our annual semi-formal dance winter balls, as sponsored by the sophomore class, will be this Friday at the Oak Club. And our annual musical Fiddler on the Roof, which this year's Fiddler on the Roof. Auditions will be held on Wednesday, and we're getting that underway. Also happening this Wednesday is the Peace of Mind Club will be sponsoring, well, they've asked an Iraq War veteran to come and speak on behalf of his experience and his ideas, basically. And we're going to have that during lunch on Wednesday. As of now, leadership is just brainstorming ideas for the new semester. Seniors are currently filling out FAFSAs, and everybody is preparing for finals in the next 2 weeks. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'll start off with The Angels in America, which is our next play, directed by English teacher Jean Kahane. It'll be coming to Encino's Cafeteria. Showtimes are January 25th, 26th, and February 1st and 2nd at 7 p.m. Also, 8th grade information night is on January 8th. We will be talking to the 8th grade students from Chipman, Wood, and Lincoln middle schools and showing them what a wonderful school Encino is. We will also be inviting the 8th graders for tours of Encino, which start the Tuesday following the information night. And also, as you've heard earlier, DECA is still fighting to have their student store reopen. This program gives the marketing students the hands-on experience that teaches outside of the textbook. This store also provides a source of fundraising that most extracurricular programs don't have as a result of the wellness policy. DECA will continue to fight for the reopening of the store. Also, I would like to end by congratulating the Encino basketball team, who had a huge won their tournament in Hawaii over the Christmas break. So congratulations to them. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. You're welcome to stay, and if you like, the next item might be a little while.
Mr. Chair, through
Yes.
the chair.
Yes.
I'd like to, through the chair, I'd like to ask the superintendent, given that we have a large number of speakers and it would be, given that there are two items that have a lot of interest, both the technology report and the charter school report, Superintendent Daly, would it be okay? Is there any urgency to the technology report, or could we postpone that to the next meeting and begin with the ACLC report?
And give it its due time and interest.
Then I'd make a motion that we defer the technology report to a later date.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 If that's, aye.